What's up everybody? Happy New Year and welcome back to the channel. It's finally time for the 2023 VGC season to get started. In just a couple of days, the San Diego Regional will kick off the regional season, and we're going to see a lot of interesting meta developments this weekend. It's really going to be the first true major of Scarlet and Violet, which should help to sort of show us the direction in which the meta will go. The meta has been in flux for so many weeks now, constantly shifting. If you take a week off of Pokemon right now, it feels like you come back to a totally different format, and it still kind of feels that way, even though things have slowed down a little bit. So I thought I would make this video real quickly to let you guys in on what I think are going to be the big performers in San Diego this weekend, how are the sort of most common cores going to perform, and what kind of up-and-coming Pokemon might see deep runs in the tournament. First of all, let's talk about the most important archetype in the entire format since the game has come out. Dondozo Tatsugiri is going to remain the single most important archetype for this tournament. We've seen tournaments that Dondozo hasn't won, but it's always been doing pretty well. And most recently, Hong Kong had their biggest ever in-person tournament this past weekend. Every single team in the top 4 had a Dondozo Tatsugiri on it, so that gives you an idea of just how strong this combo is. Now, it's a little bit interesting because I feel like the biggest problem Dondozo's gonna have is the sheer number of other Dondozos. It's become kind of a meme in the VGC scene that if you're playing Dondozo and you run into a Dondozo mirror, it's gonna go to timer. Like, most of the time it will straight up go to timer because the two fish just can't KO each other. So that's going to be one thing. It's really quite grueling to have to play a lot of timer games in a 10-round tournament. But on top of that, there's also just a lot of different ways to run these Dondozos. A lot of the Dondozo development in the meta has been essentially trying to make them win the mirror. So you have sort of the standard SubProtect leftover set. This is the one that has been the most common since the Pokemon has sort of come to the fore. It's been the most standard. It does the best into just the general variety of stuff, but it's pretty exploitable. For something like this, you can have the Rest Sleep Talk Dondozo, which has a little bit more healing potential than the opposing Dondozo. If you fight against another Dondozo, this one's going to do just a little bit more damage, and that makes the Rest Sleep Talk version just better in the mirror. But Rest Sleep Talk is even more abusable by ye old Fissure Dondozo. This is a thing that is actually a thing right now. People are now running Fissure to counter the Rest Talk Dondozo, because even though you are Rest Talk, you're going to be healing up very, very well. It's still going to take a long time to knock out the opposing Dondozo, and that's a lot of opportunities to click the Fissure button. But Fissure also has led to now people running Terra Flying Dondozo. So as you can see, this whole matchup is a mess. You're kind of relying on hopefully not hitting opposing Dondozo to begin with, or if you do hit a Dondozo, it turns into a little bit of like matchup roulette here. Which Dondozo are you going to hit? Is it going to be a favorable matchup? Is it going to be a bad matchup? Who knows? You're just going to have to play the game and find out. So because of all of this, I actually don't expect Dondozo to win the tournament. I also don't expect Dondozo to do that well. I think there will be teams that do well with it. It will be represented in Top Cut. Probably a lot. There's 32 players in the top cut of this tournament. I wouldn't be surprised to see like 10 or 11 running Dondozo, but I don't think it's going to win the tournament unless a top player has found a way to completely reinvigorate and reinvent this archetype. Then I think it can work, because the other problem is that Dondozo is the most popular thing in the format. It's the biggest threat. Everyone is building with Dondozo in mind. So if it does win, Dondozo's here to stay. It's going to be the biggest thing in this entire format for the existence of the format, because at this point in time, the entire meta is focused around beating Dondozo, and if it still wins the regional, God help us all. Next up, I want to talk about Annihilate, my personal favorite to win this tournament. Annihilate's been an interesting Pokemon in the format. It started off kind of popular with the Choice Scarf Final Gambit set, which fell off pretty quickly. But now, recently, it's risen in prominence again with the Rage Fist, Bulk Up, Drain Punch, Protect set. This is a set that makes it really, really difficult to KO, while progressively getting stronger either through Bulk Up boosts or taking hits powering up Rage Fist's base power. This kind of came to prominence in the last couple of weeks next to Grimmsnarl, who would set screens for it, making it even more difficult to KO, and then having things like Parting Shot to slow down the opposing Pokemon even more. But with the rise of things like Scope Lens Hydragon and also, Meowscarada being the most popular Pokemon in the format, screens haven't really been that good. So people have moved away from the Grimmsnarl towards Maushold, which is crazy good next to the Annihilate. You have Redirection with Follow Me, you have Beat Up, which can make this Annihilate instantly go from a little bit of a not-so-scary thing on turn 1 to having a 250 base power stab move, which is ridiculous. And on top of all of that, the Maushold has Friend Guard, which does not get ignored by crits. So previously, Flower Trick, Crit Hydragon, those things ignored Grimmsnarl's screens, which is why it wasn't that great. But Friend Guard, it's not quite as strong as the screens by the numbers, but the critical hit will not ignore Friend Guard's boost. So Annihilate will take crit Draco Meteors really, really well, actually, even if we're seeing a really special attack invested Hydragon. So it can be very, very difficult to remove this. The main downfall of the Annihilate Maushold core so far is that a lot of players are over-investing in the Annihilate Maushold. They're like, oh, Annihilate's a broken Pokemon, let me build my whole team around the Annihilate. Annihilate, Maushold, double redirect is pretty common with either Volcarona or Indeedee or something, and then sometimes they'll even throw screens on there. It's like 3 support Pokemon and an Annihilate +2. It's too much, it's not great, because you run into a matchup where Annihilate's not that awesome, and suddenly you're in a lot of trouble. But Annihilate Maushold's a really good combo just on its own. I think you can slot this onto a team of 4 pretty effectively without going too all in on the Annihilate, and that's what I expect to see do very, very well this weekend. If you put this on a Good Stuff's core, which we'll talk about later, or if you just build a normal-looking team around the Annihilate Maushold, I think that's incredibly scary, because if the opponent has to constantly be aware that Annihilate Maushold is a threat, and then you have other options that you can just lead knowing that they're going to have to respect the ape, that's a really, really scary thing for opponents to deal with, and I think it's going to be very, very strong this weekend. So I mentioned it before, let's talk Good Stuffs. Probably the most commonly used core of 4 since the inception of VGC 2023's format: Murkrow, Golden Go, Hydragon, Garchomp. This is a good core. It's not bad, it's solid. There's a lot of different ways you can build this. It's pretty flexible. The Murkrow is kind of going to be set in its ways. The Garchomp is probably just going to be, maybe it runs a Clear Amulet instead of a Life Orb. Ooh. But there's a lot of different ways you can run the Golden Go, a lot of different ways you can run the Hydragon, and a lot of different ways you can round out this team with 2 more Pokemon to kind of make it fit your playstyle. It makes this core really, really strong, really, really flexible, and if you're a player who's maybe not trying to win the tournament, but you just want to get some championship points, then this is a great way to go. I think we're going to see a lot of this team around the X3 area, people who are getting 40, 50 points from this tournament, but not making super, super deep runs. I would be surprised to see this in the top 8, but I wouldn't be too surprised if one of them managed to top cut into the top 32. So what's happened to Armarouge and Indeedee? Armarouge and Indeedee was everyone's bread and butter at the beginning of the format. Armarouge was everywhere, and Indeedee was pretty common next to it. And now it's just kind of not a thing as much anymore. Well, the simple answer to that is that Assault Vest Hydragon with Snarl became a reasonably popular thing, and even though it's not every Hydragon running Assault Vest, there's really not a great way for this kind of a core to win against that. It just kind of gives you an auto-loss matchup that you can't afford. Some players who really want to run Armarouge and Indeedee have been adding things like Defiant King Gambit to try to scare away the Snarls, which has been able to work a little bit, and I don't think this core is bad by any means, but this is definitely not the meta for it anymore. All of that being said, I don't love sort of the Tailwind Trick Room Armarouge and Indeedee stuff that's been more common, but I actually think Hard Trick Room is really strong right now. If you run something like a Torkoal King Gambit backline here and just go all in on trying to end the game in those 5 Trick Room turns, I think this core becomes really, really scary. The current meta is not really set up to deal with Hard Trick Room that well. Dondozo doesn't really care about it quite as much, but a lot of the other teams that are popular are not going to like dealing with Torkoal right now. They're not going to like dealing with Armarouge and Trick Room. A lot of this stuff is going to struggle into a Hard Trick Room team. I don't think Hard Trick Room is going to be that popular because I just haven't seen a lot of it in my practice, but I feel like somebody's going to roll up with a really, really cool Hard Trick Room team, and they're going to do really, really well with it. So that's enough talking about cores. Let's talk about some individual popular Pokemon. Meowscarada is currently the #1 most used Pokemon. It enjoys a spot on about 40% of the teams right now, and it deserves it. It's kind of interesting, right? Because Meowscarada is a pretty good Pokemon on its own merits, but it's mostly the way the meta has kind of shaped itself to bring out the best in Meowscarada that's making it crazy. The ability for it to ignore screens for Annihilate, ignore boosts for Dondozo just with the guaranteed critical hits of Flower Trick, pivoting with U-turns really cool, Protean is really, really neat as well. There's just a lot that's going for the Meowscarada, even outside of the fact that it's already just a really decent Pokemon. Meowscarada is probably going to win this regional. I know I said earlier that Annihilate's probably going to win this regional. The thing about Meowscarada is you can slot it into pretty much any team, and if Annihilate wins the regional, Meowscarada's probably going to be there. If Dondozo wins the regional, Meowscarada's probably going to be there. Meowscarada, I would put money on winning this regional. There's a bunch of different ways you can run it. I personally think the Choice Band set's really, really good. That's what we have here, but you can run it with Focus Sash as well. There's some Life Orb variants even running around just to make sure that you don't have the downside of being choiced while still getting a pretty big offensive boost. But I think Meowscarada is an amazing Pokemon. That is the least hot take anyone has ever said. I expect it to probably win the regional. Goldengo is still a very splashable Pokemon. I would expect this to be on a very large portion of teams that finish in sort of the X3 range, getting CP for a lot of players, but probably not being super common the later we go into the tournament. It's a really, really strong way to checkmate weaker players. Things like Nasty Plot, Life Orb are amazing. If you miss position one turn against something like that, you just lose the game outright. But the top players, the best players, they all know how to play around Goldengo pretty well, and there's not that much cheeky new stuff you could do with a Goldengo to catch people off guard. Weakness Policy Bulky Goldengo is becoming a little more common, and that could do pretty well, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Goldengo in some of these, like, top 8 teams, but I think it's probably going to be mostly around sort of the X2, X3 range for this Pokemon. Hydragon has seen a lot of development lately, but I think despite all of the effort being poured into it, it's going to underperform, at least compared to how much it's going to be used in the tournament. I still expect to see it in a lot of X3 teams and probably even making a run into the top 8, but I don't expect it to win the tournament, and I don't expect it to be quite as omnipresent as some people are expecting it to be. One of the most popular ways to run Hydragon these days is with this Scope Lens set. Basically, you combine the Scope Lens crit boost to the Focus Energy crit boost, and the Hydragon crits 100% of the time. That makes it a really nice counter to things like Dondozo and Screens Annihilate, where that critical hit bypassing the defensive tools of the opponent is super, super nice. But I mentioned earlier that Mouse Ape specifically is a pain point for this Hydragon. It doesn't ignore the Friend Guard boost. As a result, it actually only does like 60% to the Annihilate, which is really not what you want from a Pokemon that's taking a full turn to set up guaranteed crits. It also struggles with some other things that are pretty popular in the format. Banded Meowscarada can be a problem for this Hydragon, as well as just a bunch of the less common things that are probably gonna be around, right? Like, there's a lot of things that you don't necessarily prep for super hard, but in a 10-round Swiss tournament, you're probably gonna hit a couple of them. And this Hydragon is so specific into the meta. It likes specific matchups that the random stuff you're probably gonna hit at a 10-round regional is really not gonna be fun for the Hydragon to deal with. So, if you're running Hydragon, I wish you the best of luck, but I don't really have that much faith in this dragon. Sylveon is the number 3 most used Pokemon in this format right now, which is insane to me. Sylveon actually got an indirect nerf as well, because the Pixie Plate, which is Sylveon's favorite held item, is no longer accessible. So, despite getting a nerf, it's the most successful I think it's ever been, which is awesome. Sylveon's a great Pokemon. Who doesn't love Sylveon? This is the most common way people are running Sylveon right now. Hyper Voice, Terra Blast, Yawn, Protect with the Throat Spray ability and a Terra type of Water or Fire, one of the two. And it's really, really interesting. So Sylveon, the coolest thing that it gets access to is Terra Blast. Basically, when you are not terastallized, Pixelate will turn Terra Blast into essentially Moonblast. But then when you terastallize, it becomes Terra Blast Water or Fire or whatever your type is, which is really cool. Basically, the Sylveon gets access to 5 moves, which is a neat thing that very, very few Pokemon can say, and I really like that for it. It also has an interesting matchup into several of the very popular Pokemon in the format. It's very, very good in its base form against base form Annihilate, and the reason it's running Terra Water is that a lot of the Annihilates are running Terra Fire, so even if the Annihilate terastallizes to be resisting the Hyper Voice hits, Sylveon can also terastallize to then hit it super effectively with Terra Water. So that's a super nice niche for the Sylveon. But on top of that, with Throat Spray, it can just dish out a ton of damage. It can be a very, very bulky backliner that's hard to remove for the opponent while it just fires off spread hyper voices turn after turn, chipping the opponent into oblivion. The definite matchup to watch out for Sylveon is Sylveon versus Annihilate. It is a really interesting one. On paper, Sylveon is a pretty good counter, but there's a lot of mind games involved. Who's going to terastallize when? Is the Annihilate player going to beat up and try to Rage Fist the Sylveon? There's a lot of ways that both of these Pokemon can take each other out, and I think it's going to be one of the most interesting sort of face-offs Pokemon by Pokemon this weekend. So keep an eye out for the Sylveon Annihilate matchups. I think they're going to be pretty fire. Talonflame is another Pokemon that's been rising quite a lot. It's an interesting alternate priority Tailwind setter to Murkrow. So where Murkrow is a slightly more reliable Tailwind setter, it's more bulky with the Eviolite, and also Prankster will always be priority, whereas Gale Wings only activates when Talonflame is full HP. Talonflame also gets a couple of interesting other options, specifically the threat of a priority Brave Bird, which is really, really nice if your opponent is running something like Tailwind Meowscarada, or even something like an Annihilate next to Grimmsnarl, where you could use Brave Bird before the Grimmsnarl uses Reflect and just remove the Annihilate entirely. So Talonflame has some really, really cool things on Murkrow. I think Murkrow is still a better Pokemon all around if you're just looking for a general Tailwind setter. Murkrow is probably going to be better for you, but on some teams, Talonflame is awesome. It really gives you that extra little bit of support plus offensive pressure that some teams need, and then also you have access to things like Will-O-Wisp and Flare Blitz that Murkrow just doesn't have access to. So on some teams, Talonflame is going to be something that you need to keep an eye out for. It's up to about 11% usage right now, so definitely something you're going to see if you're watching San Diego, and if you're playing, be ready for the Talonflame. A hot take here, I actually think Corbinite's going to do really, really well this tournament. I don't expect it to be super popular, but I think the people using it will do well. Corbinite is a little bit of a bias point for me. It's my favorite Pokemon, but I think that Corbinite is awesome. It has the wrong ability here, but I think Corbinite is a really, really sick Pokemon in this format. You get access to Tailwind, which is nice to have, but also Bulk Up, Brave Bird, and Roost. Something that will allow it to potentially outlast opposing Annihilates, and also Flying is just a really, really good offensive typing in this format. You have Annihilate, you have Meowscarada, you have a lot of stuff that gets hit neutrally by Flying, a Moongus. All of these things really don't like getting hit by Flying moves. So Corbinite, I think, has a really interesting niche. It works really, really well on bulky offense teams. There have been some players who have been using it to great effect in some of the team tournaments, and it's also seen some play in some of the bigger online tournaments as well. So if we see a top player decide Corbinite's the play, I think it has the absolute potential to go deep in this tournament. Probably not going to be something you see on a lot of teams, but if you see it on some teams, I think it'll be pretty close to the top, depending on who's running it. But keep your eye out. Corbinite, my hot take, my hot pick for who I think will have a good run. Those are the big things that I think you need to be looking out for this weekend. I'm going to run through a couple more options just as sort of a lightning round. I think Pawmot's really cool. Pawmot is really, really good on some teams. We're not quite at the point where it's being appreciated yet, but I think you'll see a Pawmot go deep. Volcarona has been seeing a little bit more play as well, just an alternate redirector. Quiver Dance is good, and, you know, obviously with Terra typing, you don't ever want to feel forced to Terra type a Pokemon, which is kind of why Mons like Volcarona can be a little bit weaker, but you can Terra away that double weakness to Rock, which is super nice. Arcanine with Assault Vest is something that's seeing a little bit more play. It's pretty good as an offensive threat, gets access to Intimidate and Snarl, so it can lower the stats on both offensive sides, and it gets some pretty interesting coverage. Extreme Speed's really good, Play Rough is really good, it also gets things like Wild Charge if you're lacking damage and sort of the electric side of things. So Arcanine, something you could see. And on the same sort of trend, Tauros Paldea Water is another one. You know, it's another Intimidator, but this one is a little bit more interesting on the offensive side of things. You get Aqua Jet, Raging Bull in close combat, and with an Expert Belt, these will pick off a lot of things in one hit. Maybe not the Aqua Jet, but Raging Bull gets some really good one-hit KOs with the Expert Belt. Same with close combat, and of course, Intimidate, always nice to have. Gothitelle is seeing some play as well. It's always good early format. It's almost honestly always good. Shadow Tag is just a really good ability. Fake Out's a really good move. So Gothitelle, something to keep an eye out for as well. It's something that is very, very scary in an open team sheet format, something you have to really respect. Maybe not the best time for it right now because you have popular ghost types like Golden Go and like Annihilate kind of all over the format, so might not be the time for Gothitelle, but I think it's definitely something to look out for. And finally, Scizor. I think Scizor is a really, really good Pokemon in this format. Not a lot of people are using it. Honestly, it fills the same kind of role within Assault Vest as like Assault Vest King Gambit. And I will admit that I think King Gambit's better for most teams, but on some teams, Scissor does a job that King Gambit just can't. Access to things like Technician Pounce is really cool, Priority Bullet Punch is really, really cool, and Terra Water, Terra Blast is always nice to have in this format, so I wouldn't be too surprised to see Scissor do well either. That's just about it for my San Diego regional preview. Let me know in the comments below which Pokemon you expect to win it all, and give me a hot take on a Pokemon that you think is going to do well that people are maybe overlooking. Glamora in the top 16, Gallade in the top 8, I don't know, let me know what you guys think. If you're going to be in San Diego, I'm going to be in San Diego, so come say hi. If you're playing in the tournament, best of luck. I can't wait to see what players bring. I can't wait to see what people show off on the stream. We're going to have so many awesome games, so make sure that you, if you're at home, make sure that you watch the event. It's going to be awesome, and I will see you guys on the other side. Bye-bye.